All right, MMA Today for tomorrow. It's been a while, and we got a new face joining us, Max Freeman. What's going on, Max?
John, it's good to be here, man. I've been wanting to join this MMA Today podcast and jump in for a while now, so real honored to be here talking UFC St. Louis with you tonight.
For sure. And of course, we got Dr. King, MMA Kings. What's going on?
How's it going, guys? I'm doing pretty well. Pretty solid night of fights. Can't complain. Excited fight week in Boston next week, and just keep this ball rolling into 2018.
Let's start with the bottom of the card. The prelims. Let's start with Jessica Ai, because I thought Jessica Ai was gonna come out and do some work, but to be honest with you, I was disappointed in what she did, man. She didn't look any different than she did before. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think honestly, I picked against her. I don't know. I'm very I don't know. I for some reason I was like, sometimes these fighters start to lose it, and this is kind of her last shot. She's up. If she lost that, she was going to tie Kaylin Karn for most losses in women's MMA or UFC history. So I don't know. I just felt like the momentum wasn't in her favor, so I picked against her. With that being said, I thought that Faria, I thought looked a little better than I thought she was going to look. I thought her striking was better. Her debut, she just got taken down and subbed, so it was kind of hard to gauge that. But overall, I thought she did okay. I had her winning the fight. I saw some people thought that Faria won, but I thought she was all right. Maybe a little step under what we're used to, but it's good for her to get back in the win column, just pick up a W.
What about you, Max?
Yeah, like you said, John, she didn't really impress. She really looked pretty much the same that she's been on the same pace that throughout her bantamweight fights. Like Nolan said, Faria did look a little bit better than her UFC debut. She got submitted in the first round by Mara Romero Barella, but overall, she gets the win here. But where does she go from here? There are a lot of fresh faces at 125, but based on that performance, it's hard to think she can really make a run toward the top at 125.
I think that with this narrow decision win, I would put her against, if the UFC still has her on the roster, Roxanne Modafferi. I think that's another good gauge for both each other, you know what I mean? Like testing each other out, because whoever basically loses kind of like leaves town, I guess. But it seems like the UFC, they like Jessica Ai, because they be keeping her around, man, for a long time, and she's been losing, and she's never really looked that impressive. She talks a lot of shit, but I don't know, man. It's just confusing to me why they keep bringing her back.
Right, the leash is definitely short. The leash is a little bit longer when it comes to women fighters. She has been one to talk and speak her mind on social media. I think that's gained her a little bit of traction as far as fan favorite and fandom goes. But yeah, Modafferi would be a great matchup. If Roxanne can employ that grappling heavy style and wear her down, then yeah. But I will definitely have a clear, distinct striking advantage going against Roxanne.
Yeah, I agree there. I think both women have a certain amount of name recognition associated with them, and just seems like they're at similar points in their career where they really need to pick up these W's to stay relevant and stay on the roster. So that's good matchmaking. We might have to have a third matchmaker added to the UFC here.
No, I'm good. But let's move on to the next one, which was Kyung-Ho Kang. He's returning from like over 3 years, being absent from the UFC. And then the other guy, Canetti, he was popped for, I think, for some chronic, right, back in the day when it was illegal. And, and they returned, long layoffs. Kang, he looked like he had ring rust. If you watched him, if you know how he fights, he looked like he was kind of very tentative in the striking exchanges. Canetti caught him a few times. But once he, got clinched up, Kang seemed like he was back at home and he got that submission, man. It was pretty impressive, I thought.
Yeah, me too. The fight ended exactly the way I thought it was going to, but the means of getting there was completely reversed, really. I thought Canetti looked actually pretty good. He was throwing some real heat on some of those strikes. One of those wheel kicks, I would have knocked Kong's head off, but luckily for Kong, he was able to kind of shake off that ring rust just in time to pull off that sub. Pretty exciting ending there with the slam that turned out not to be a slam and the sub. So I thought, it was probably good for Kong to get back in there, get a training camp, all that stuff. And I'm looking forward to seeing him, what he can do on, fighting on a regular basis from now on.
Yeah, I've always liked Kong too. He's got a great frame for 135 pounds, and you saw it here in this matchup against Kennedy. I thought Kennedy looked improved too. They mentioned he's been training out of Team Alpha Male. He looked a lot better than he did on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 1 or in either of his first 2 UFC fights. But agree with what you said, John. Definitely some ring rust, but to be expected with a 3.5-year layoff almost. I exactly agree with what Nolan said. I'd love to see him match up against many different guys at 135 pounds.
Yeah, Kang, he's a big dude. Like, if you've seen him next to the Korean Superboy, who we'll talk about later, he's bigger than the Korean Superboy, but he fights at a weight class lower than him, which is kind of a trip to kind of think about how, he cuts his weight, because I don't know, man. Like, I think you could only cut weight for so long, especially being away from the cage. That might have affected him because he wasn't cutting weight all those years. So I don't know for sure, but yes, it was impressive. Where do you think Max Kong, who does Kong fight next?
Well, that's a tough one, man. I want to go back to one thing you just said about his frame, which is so true. I think they said on the broadcast that he's got a 72-inch reach. Stefan Struve, I believe, has an 82-inch reach, and Struve is 15 inches taller or whatever. So that's pretty solid on his part. But as far as who he fights next, man, that's a tough one. I don't really have a name off the top of my head. Maybe Max has somebody circulating, but
I got one. I'd like to see him match up against Ronnie Yaya, because Kong's definitely a grapple first kind of guy. Yaya, the traditional jiu-jitsu martial artist, that works best from the top position, top control, the typical passer guard type. And Kong's a much heavier offensive grappler too, and he's quite large for the weight class. So I think those two match up pretty well, and you can throw it either in Brazil or if the UFC were to return to Asia later this year, that'd be something to add to that card.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, this division, because you can't throw him against like a top 15 guy, because you saw that he was a little rusty. You know what I mean? So I think it's better. I think it would be good for him to fight somebody that is coming off a win instead of coming off a loss, to kind of build on the momentum that he's just created for himself. I don't really have a name in mind right now, but I look forward to. I think he'll be back quick, especially with like more cards they're having, since they're having more cards on this side of the world, like in Australia and New Zealand and in Asia. So we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, he's fun to watch, because actually his best fight was the one where he fought Michinori Tanaka. If you remember that fight, was a badass fight. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one was Matt Favela versus Polo Reyes, which was pretty shocking to me, because when they introduced these fighters, they introduced Matt Favela as a technical brawler. I don't know what the fuck that means, man. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's not what it meant, what we saw tonight, because there wasn't a whole lot of technique going down there. I kind of had this concern going into the fight, and I feel like I got persuaded a little bit by public opinion. I hate to be that guy that comes back afterwards and says, "Oh, I told you guys so." But if you watch his Contender Series bout, he was obviously very overconfident, like he was tonight. But Luke Flores, the guy he fought on Contender Series, wasn't really able to capitalize on that. He was kind of running away from him, like trying to avoid and slow the pace down, but he couldn't escape Favola. But that plays right into Polo Reyes' game. For him to be able to have a wild brawl with somebody that comes in with their, essentially with their head down and just throws punches. That was just, I don't think that was a very good showing for Favola. But on top of that, I think he's got some stuff just foundationally that he needs to improve and change and work on. So hopefully this is a little bit of a wake-up call. Unfortunately, that it had to happen that way. But, I would take some time off, try to improve, try to get his, his techniques down more, not come in winging, and hopefully we'll see him back, sometime by in the next few months or something.
Yeah, for Bola, they certainly seem to be building him quite a bit, especially after his win on the Contender Series, and that he's also training now at Weidman Longo MMA up in Long Island. Polo Reyes, whenever he steps in the octagon, it's going to be a war. He's got those 2 knockout wins over Cesar Goku and Maestro Donghyun Kim, not to mention he had one on the Tough Latino America as well. And then his 2 losses that we've seen, both to Horacio Gutierrez on the show and James Vick, he's getting knocked out. So something's going to happen when Polo Reyes steps in the octagon. And like Nolan said, I mean, he really capitalized on that aggressiveness of Favola and used some real clean technical counter-striking to pick him apart.
Yeah, definitely picked him apart. Now let's move on to the main card. Unless you guys want to talk about James Krause versus Alex White. Do you want to talk about that?
I mean, I thought it was just brief comments on it. I thought it was a good fight. I mean, it was kind of you clearly could see what both of them were good at and better at than the others. Krause was kind of getting pieced on the feet, just take White down, control him there, and just repeat. So pretty straightforward. I don't know. James Krause to me is just, I don't know, man. I don't know what to think of him at this point. His last few fights, how he performed, on the Ultimate Fighter, granted it was up a weight class. He hasn't looked as good as maybe my memory is serving me wrong, but I thought that he had looked better in the past. So I guess we'll see where he goes from here now that he's back at 155.
Yeah, Krause is interesting because he is a jiu-jitsu guy at heart, but he is pretty tall and long for the weight class at 155. He's and like Nolan said, he was fighting up at 170 on the Ultimate Fighter and also in his fight against Tom Galicchio after the Ultimate Fighter finale. Where he goes from here, one of the matchups I really like for him is Charles Oliveira. I think both those guys grappling first, offensive grapplers, good submission skills, good chokes. I think those 2 match up pretty well. And yes, Oliveira is coming off the loss to Paul Felder, but both those guys sit kind of near outside the top 15, and would be a fun matchup in my opinion.
Is Krause the definition of a gatekeeper?
It depends on which gate he's keeping. I think he's a gatekeeper to a middle tier of the division. I don't think he's a gatekeeper of like the rankings. I don't think he's a gatekeeper necessarily of like, being in the UFC, but I think in terms of being, above a 500 fighter in the UFC, he might be that gatekeeper role.
Yeah, for sure. Krause, he's just a guy that's been in the UFC, out the UFC, he just lingers around. I think he's going to be around for the next 5 years, to be honest with you, just like winning and losing. So we'll see what happens with him. It's hard to say what the UFC wants from him, but Alex White, yeah, I thought like you said earlier that he did a good job on the feet, but once he went to the ground, man, it was just like a blanket. He just could not get out of that, those positions. So, but anyways, let's move on to this card was pretty fucking good, I thought, man. All around, all the fights were good. Like, even people were booing fucking Usman and Mek. Is that how you're supposed to say his fucking name? Because I thought it was Meek.
Yeah.
Neil Mek, yeah.
Mek, right? I thought that was a fucking clinic of a fight, man. It was just – he said he was 30%. That was crazy. But before we talk about that, let's talk about Darren Elkins coming in and just strangling the shit out of Michael Johnson after getting his ass whooped for fucking 5.5 minutes for real bad. Man, it was pretty impressive, man. Darren Elkins, can he go to the top?
I mean, I think he's kind of there at this point. He just won his way there. You can say you can criticize his means of getting there, say that he's not technical, say that he's not a top level fighter, but he's in that position right now, whether you like it or not. And I think you got to give him a top contender at this point. He's coming off of 3 really impressive wins against tough guys, Mirsad Bektik, Dennis Bermudez, and now Michael Johnson. You got to give him somebody. I don't even – if Ortega's on the shelf, he's just sitting out, I don't have a problem with the UFC giving him that Josh Emmett fight, or if the Korean Zombie decides, is going to be back in the next few months, I would be happy with that matchup too. I just think top 5, top 6 guys, 100% he's earned it.
Darren Elkins, man, he's proven himself. 6 in a row. I was just kind of curious, so I ran a little calculation earlier. A 1-unit bet on Darren Elkins is 18 career UFC fights, and that's 17 and a half units. The guy continues to upset top competition. The second he got that opportunity to snatch up the choke, he took it. As far as his next opportunity, he deserves a high-profile fight. One thing I do want to point out, Nolan, you mentioned Josh Emmett. Both those guys are stationed at Team Alpha Male, so it might be a little bit tough to match those two up. But rankings-wise, it definitely makes sense. Cub Swanson sits ahead of him. That's a good possibility if Ortega is healthy. Maybe him or maybe even Jeremy Stevens tonight. I know the two of them fought in Chicago back in 2014, but if not, if most of the division's booked up, then it's a possible matchup too.
Even Jose Aldo, if Aldo decides to stick at 145, I'd be down with that one.
Yeah, I like that little Korean zombie when he comes back. That would be an interesting fight.
In your eye. I saw that.
Yeah, that even like if because the zombie's not supposed to, the earliest he's supposed to be back from my sources is that maybe June is the earliest because his injury was pretty bad. Yeah. So it's the earliest is June, and from what I heard is the UFC is coming to Korea maybe even before that from the rumors that are going around over here in this island nation. Yeah, the Korean zombie would be badass if they actually maybe have the card later in the year, like in October or even maybe in the summer. They come out here, Darren Elkins versus the Korean zombie main event, 2 top guys. It will pull in so much over here, and Elkins he deserves it. Michael Johnson, though, he drops down to featherweight for the first time, does basically what he always does when he loses is he starts off really good. He looks fucking on fire. Man, he has the quickest hands I've fucking ever seen, right? It's like bap, 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 bap. You know what I mean? It's so fast. But he seems like he just gives up in some aspects, don't you think, in his fights?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first time, Max can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the first time in a while we've seen him get taken down by like a high-level grappler. I always had flashbacks to him fighting Reza Madadi in Sweden when Madadi just kept taking him down and just kind of mauled him on the ground, And that was kind of Michael Johnson, the story of his early UFC stint. The early period of his UFC stint was, kind of being a guy that was taken down, could be easily controlled, outworked, out-cardioed, and then just submitted or dominated. And, going into this matchup, I always thought that possibility of that kind of emerging could come out. And tonight it did. Michael Johnson was piecing him up, like you said. And, just with the simple takedown, the tables were just completely turned. And, from there it was all over. So I don't know where he goes from here. I was thinking of different opponents. I think maybe even though he's coming off a win, Miles Jury would be a good one, but that's just a tough loss to take. All that hard work, dropping weight, trying to get back in the win column, and then to have that happen, man, that's probably devastating for him.
Yeah, I really thought tonight was going to be a different story for Michael Johnson, being the only St. Louis native on the card here, graduated of nearby Marquette High School. He, like John said, I mean, he seems like he's a first-round guy. He goes out, he really establishes his range, establishes his striking skills early on. He's a southpaw, he's quick. Like a perfect example, Dustin Poirier, at the time he knocked him out back in September 2016, that was a first-round knockout. But the later the fight goes, it seems like he starts to fade it a little bit and is susceptible to that takedown. We saw it against, like you said, Reza Madadi back in Sweden, a few years ago, but then as more recently, Khabib Nurmagomedov, but everyone's getting taken down by him. And then here against Darren Elkins tonight. So where he goes from here, a lot of different matchups, but Miles Jury is definitely a good name, comes to mind. We'll see what the status of Doo-Ho Choi is after his suspension. The two of them might be a fun fireworks of the first round. We'll see, but Johnson definitely has some adjustments to make.
Yeah, Johnson, even in the Khabib fight, he was kind of piecing Khabib up in the first round too. And, man, I like Johnson a lot, but it just, like, I don't know what he's doing. Is he making any changes, or is it just all mental? It could be mental, man. It could just be like he's so good in the in the gym, but now when he goes out to fight, once it gets past that 5-minute mark, it's just like his mental capacity for fighting just shuts down and he's like gone. And once he gets to the ground, he just loses his control, and this is what happens to him. Elkins just exposed him perfectly. Kind of like how Khabib did it. You know what I mean? He just like let him throw his hands in the first, and then after that, it just was total domination. So, yeah, it sucks for Johnson because he jumped down to kind of get a fresh start, and mentally that could be even worse for him because he did go down to get a new start, and it just didn't work out for him. So, I don't know, man. Yeah, those matchups that you guys talk about, those are pretty good matchups. I think that they would work. Even, like you said, Johnson, maybe they could be all on the same card. Korean Zombie and, Elkins and Johnson and, what is it, Korean Superboy. It could be cool, whatever. Now,
Hey, that'd be a heck of a main card
yeah,
anywhere in the country, anywhere in
yeah,
the world.
for real. Maybe there's got to be a Koreatown close by. But anyways, yeah, bring the kimchi. But anyways, yeah, let's talk about Usman. Man, I thought Usman did a fucking phenomenal job. And like I said earlier, if he's 30%, man, I would love to see him fight Tyron Woodley. If he could be 100%.
I'd be interested to hear what his explanation exactly was on that. At first when he started talking, I thought he was obviously going to say, "Oh, I was sick or I was injured or whatever," but he made it sound like kind of that it was an intentional 30%, like, "Oh, I didn't need to go 40%." So I'm kind of interested to hear. I don't know how much I would necessarily buy into that. I don't know if it was just like a mic thing. I honestly, I don't know. There's a lot. I'd have to hear more about it to really judge it. But yeah, man, he looked great. I think that. Again, like I tweeted this out, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing thing to watch. I completely understand that. If you tuned in and never had seen the UFC before, I totally get that whole argument. With that being said, it doesn't take anything away from how good he is. This is MMA for a reason. If we didn't have fighters like him, wouldn't be MMA. People wouldn't be prepared for everywhere the fight would go. So, you got to respect it. Hopefully the UFC matchmaking can give him somebody that's, above Emil Meek. I hope they don't end up overdoing it now, that he beat Emil Meek, and I hope they give him a matchup that makes sense. I kind of like the Colby Covington fight. I kind of like a Gunnar Nelson matchup. I actually kind of prefer that one. And then, the other name that was thrown around was Darren Till, possibility. But overall, dominant performance, impressive nonetheless. And let's get him a top 10, top 8 guy.
Usman's ultra impressive. He is using this smothering attack every time in and out, with the exception of the Sergio Moraes knockout. I mean, he has implemented his game plan perfectly tonight against Emil Meek, Warley Alves, Leon Edwards, Alexander Yakovlev, the list, Sean Strickland. These guys aren't bottom of the barrel welterweights here. These are guys that are tough. He definitely needs to step up in competition, and I think all three of those matchups that Nolan listed out would be exceptional. Gunnar Nelson stands out of those options you listed, especially because of how his grappling accolades too. And would Usman be able to implement that type of game plan against someone such a high-level grappler like Nelson, and then be forced to utilize his striking line? We'll see. Those are all great matchups, and like you said, John, I wouldn't hate to watch him fight Tyron Woodley. I know it's probably unlikely at this point, but that would be a fun matchup. Two very similar styles colliding there.
Yeah, the reason why I said that was because I was listening to Tyron Woodley interview that he did, and he was talking about the fighters that are in the rankings right now that he could fight, and he mentioned Usman as being one of those dangerous guys that are coming up. So that's why I mentioned that. Also, Usman, Colby Covington, right? Yes, that would be a good fight, and he keeps calling him out, right? But big rumors, man, right now, the next Ultimate Fighter is going to be Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley, because Tyron Woodley just got the surgery. He's going to be out for a while. He's got to find something to do, which is what's perfect to do, is just sit and talk shit to the guy that's talking shit to you all day and film it all the time and, edit it and make it look good and build up a fight. But I don't think there's any threat to Tyron Woodley. Sorry, I don't want to say his name wrong. Yeah, but going back to Usman, yeah, you guys mentioned that, like Gunnar Nelson, he's a good grappler, but you got to find somebody that can fight off their back. And I think even though the dude is coming off a loss and maybe his motivation is not there, but I think Damian Maia would be a good fight because he can fight off his back. And if he does get taken down, it would be interesting to see what he can do in those grappling exchanges. But maybe I'm wrong.
Count me in on that one. I would 100% watch the shit out of that one. So, yeah, hell yeah.
That could be a main event in Brazil. Who knows?
Yeah. I just want, I want to see with fighters like Usman, I always like to see where their ceiling could be. Like, I like that moment where they have to deal with adversity or there's something that's just not working out and see how they handle it and what other tools they have before I give like a really, before I'm all in on somebody. I like to see them test a little bit. And, Usman's just been so good. We haven't seen it. Yeah. Damian Maia would be perfect.
And Emil Meek, I think that he's like one of those guys that he's not at the level of Usman. And he's kind of like one of those guys that are like kind of talked himself into getting this fight. And it kind of bit him in the ass because he just got mauled, like you said earlier.
Yeah, it sounded like a lot of guys didn't want to take that fight against Usman. And I don't think anyone blames him for that. But Emil Meek, he had that big high-profile win over Pajares back in Italy and before he was signed to the UFC. Certainly has some potential, had some positive spots in this fight, and he's massive for the weight class, but a little too much too soon.
Yeah, let's move on to Paige Van Zant, Jessica Rose Clark. This fight went down exactly the way that I thought it would go down. Jessica Rose Clark will go in there and dominate, most of the exchanges. Paige Van Zant did have some, bright moments with those flashy ballerina kicks and stuff like that, but nothing really special. She broke her arm. That's what she said in the corner. But for real, you're not supposed to say that, right? Because the commission is next to you. The ref could be there. Are you supposed to say things like that? Because once they hear something like that, aren't they supposed to stop the fight?
I mean, theoretically, yes. Maybe Missouri, kind of has the, no, I don't know. Maybe Missouri just doesn't give a damn, but that's apparently the rule. But yeah, it's kind of hard. Again, that fight played out exactly like I think most people thought it would. I don't know where she goes from here at this point. I feel like people are kind of falling off the bandwagon left and right. So the broken arm thing maybe makes it a little bit more understandable of why she didn't look that improved or why she had a poor performance, or was dominated. So I don't know. I guess I'm sure they'll give her the same push next time. And, I don't think the UFC's given up on her yet. She's still a name, and we'll see what's next for her. We'll see what the deal with her arm is, if it's actually broken or if it's something else.
Yeah, more or less the same. I mean, she was the one, she going up in weight. Jessica Rose Clark fought as high as 145 in her career. Thought that her coming down, she'd have a clear advantage, kind of get the takedown, lay and pray. And pretty much exactly went according to plan for John Wood and Syndicate MMA with Jessica Rose Clark picking up the win.
Yeah, it was, this flyweight division is something new, so it's hard to say like, oh, Jessica Rose Clark should fight this person because you don't even know if they're even a flyweight or not because it seems like they're just jumping back and forth all day. The rankings are just not even, worth even looking at because who knows what, there hasn't been enough fights, right? So Paige Van Zant, like you said, King, they're going to just keep going with her and most likely give her a fight that she can win. That's what's going to happen. Rose Clark, she's going to get somebody, higher in the rankings, which there is no rankings, but higher, more capable, I guess. But, they're trying to build – I think they're trying to build Clark off of Van Zant now. So they're going to show that, hey, we have another star coming up. We don't need Van Zant. And I think Van Zant, if she loses her next fight, they might get rid of her, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know what they'll do with her, honestly. That's probably what they would do to anybody else. But if Jessica I can get, 5 extra spots in the UFC, I'm thinking maybe they would make an exception for their golden child.
Definitely. Now, let's go to the main event, man. It was crazy. Like, this was one of those fights, Jeremy Stephens versus Duo Choi, or Yoo-Hoo Choi, or Do-Hoo Choi, or whatever the way you want to say it, because there were so many different pronunciations. And then I like the picture that they had. It was Do-Hoo Choi versus Who the Fook. You know what I mean? That was the best one. I love it. Super racist, but it's all good, right? But Duo Choi, he looked good. You know, he's returning from like 11 or 13 months off, basically. Jeremy Stevens been fighting the whole time. And Jeremy Stevens just solidified why he's Jeremy Stevens. You know what I mean? He goes in there and he just goes and stands and strikes and uses that power and just beats the shit out of Duo Choi for real.
Yeah, that was crazy, man. You know, that first round, Choi looked so good. He looked so calm, you know, and to be piecing up, you know, a veteran like Jeremy Stevens, a guy that's been at the rankings year in and year out, you know, the top of the rankings year in and year out. Very impressive performance. But then that second round, man, Stevens still has some power in the tank and just absolutely cranked Duhu, and he didn't let up. I give him credit. You know, sometimes the fighters end up going right into the guard and they don't capitalize on their opportunities. But he just, man, some of those punches and elbows were just brutal. And it was a great stoppage too, by the way. I you know, at first I was like, said something, you know, screamed at the TV. Oh, that's like, you know, that's kind of early. But, you know, Choi was down for a while. I think when they came back from commercial, he was still down. And so great stoppage by Keith Peterson. Criticized the refs enough. And this time the referee was right and I was wrong. So very impressive, though, Jeremy Stevens. I can't wait to see what they do with him next.
Jeremy Stevens, man, he can take an absolute punch, and he's done that throughout his entire UFC career. With the lone exception of that Yves Edwards knockout in what was like 2011 or 2012, he has stood in the pocket in exchange with the best of them. And Choi landed some big punches in the first round. It may not have seemed quite like it because Stevens walked right through it, but he did. And a lot of those guys would have been put down with some of those strikes. So hats off to Jeremy Stevens. What I was most impressed with, and I didn't get to hear the audio in the corner after round one, whether it was Eric Del Fiero or Miles Jury or whoever it was in the corner of Stevens, he came out far more aggressive in round two, mixing the strikes a lot more, really pressuring Choi. And I think it was about midway through the second or maybe a couple minutes in, Choi, it was very noticeable that he was starting to wear down. He seemed quite tired, and then it was from there, Stevens landed a couple big punches, and he started to feel that momentum swift his way, and ultimately got that big knockdown and then jumped on top and landed some big ground and pound. And it was a great stoppage on Keith Peterson. They did mention on the broadcast that Choi was down for quite a while, and I don't even think he got up to stand in the center of the octagon when they raised Jeremy Stevens' hand.
Yeah, the like Duo Choi, man, I think that, you know, when you get an opportunity to be a main event, especially in the UFC, and fight somebody like Jeremy Stevens, who is high in the rankings, and you could probably ride off the momentum if you do beat him because you have the skills. But at the same time, you're coming off a war, and you're not that deep into your MMA or UFC career yet to be fighting somebody like Stevens. And I felt like, hey, if he won, everybody would be like, oh, hell yeah, that dude, he's the next, thing, the next, he's the next Korean zombie or whatever the fuck you want to say, right? But now that he loses, it kind of exposes a lot of, like, missteps that he has taken. You know what I mean? Like, if he's coming back, I thought, to be honest with you, he should have took somebody lower in the rankings and not worried too much about being the main event. But the UFC, they wanted to push him because, once Dana White, he likes you, then he likes you, right? And then he's going to push you and push you and push you until you have nothing left. And big, like, for him, he went through that war, which he got knocked down a few times, which is not good for your noggin. And then now he just got destroyed, like you guys said, he did good in the beginning, but he got destroyed and he got pummeled by Jeremy Stevens, who has pummeled the best of them, right? He's just fucking destroyed the best of them. Lightweight champions. Yeah, it's just like, man, where does he go from here? Of course, they're not going to give him a top guy, but I think he has to take some time off again. You know what I mean? Like, he said he wanted to fight a bunch of times before he goes to the military, which is in a year from now, right? But with this knockout, he won't be back for another 6 months, which means if he fight, the most he can fight is maybe twice if he does that, which is not good for him. And I don't know, man. It's frustrating because, that's my people's, and, like, of course, if it's your people's, if you're somebody from your region, you want them to do well. But then after it's over with and they didn't do well, you kind of can nitpick the missteps. And that's what I'm just trying to point out. the missteps that he took. And maybe that's his manager, man. Maybe he needs a different manager. Who knows?
Yeah, it's possible. I'm kind of on the fence. I think it's obviously easy for me to say that he took this fight. It's too high of a fight for him to take now that he's been knocked out. I see why the UFC gave it to him, though. He went 3 rounds, hard rounds with Cub Swanson, who's about as good as they can get, if you're not fighting a champion. So for me, I understand why the matchup was made. It's just a matter of I feel like I'm getting caught up in like revisionist, like feeling like, oh, because he got knocked out, that fight shouldn't have been made. But at the same time, like the kid has the skill level, so it's a really tough balance to figure out where you want to put him. Just I think from here on out, it's going to be a little easier. They'll obviously take a step back, probably give him somebody in the 12 to 15 range of the rankings. But I was kind of okay with the matchup being made, and I think things just worked out, unfortunately, poorly for him. Hopefully it doesn't hinder him too much going forward.
Yeah, John, both of you guys actually make great points. You would think he would have gotten, being only 25 and being such a fan favorite and having that fan-friendly style, he would have gotten someone not quite so established as Jeremy Stephens, and maybe that was what they were doing with the UFC 214 matchup against Andre Fili that ended up getting scrapped. But overall, you saw the fight of the year candidate against Cub Swanson. Jeremy Stephens been known to have a very similar style. I think for the most part, it was just a matter of, hey, this could electrify fans no matter what card it's on. And from there, you book that fight. But it is a tough question where you go from here because he is so young, and now he's coming off 2 absolute wars, the latter in which he was knocked out pretty viciously. So someone probably outside the rankings is best to rebuild the Korean Superboy if you want to go ahead and continue to push him. One name that comes to mind is Rick Glenn, coming off the loss to Miles Jury, a true veteran, a guy who's going to go in there not afraid to mix it up with you. I think maybe him and Choi would have a good fight. And then if you want to go back the route of another war, perhaps, why not Michael Johnson? The 2 very quick hands and would be a fun stand-up war.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Stephens, he's going to get somebody. Ortega sounds good. Any of those guys in the top, I don't think he's going to get a title shot. But if he wins one more, like for example, against Ortega, knocks Ortega out because Ortega's undefeated. Yeah, Jeremy Stephens versus Max Holloway, that would sound great, on a pay-per-view. But, that's for us, not for the casuals.